Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as préféré, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Brussels, My Love, your weekly check-in on the highs and lows of European politics. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up this week, we need to talk about Gaza. Thousands took to the streets of the Belgian capital last weekend to call for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, with warnings that Gaza is edging towards a famine and the situation critical due to the aid blockade. We're looking at why securing peace is so complex and what more of a role the EU could or should play. And only hours after coming into office, the new German Chancellor took a train to Kiev. Alongside Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron and Donald Tusk, Friedrich Merz showed up in the war-torn country to insist that Europe still had Ukraine's back. Their trip came whilst other European leaders from Slovakia and Serbia were celebrating Russia's Victory Day and military might on Red Square. We're taking a look at the EU's dreams to become a military power too and rearm a continent that so heavily relies on American weapons. A warm welcome to our guests this weekend. Mark Botenga, Belgian MEP from the left.
Hello.
Evan Incher, Swedish Socialist MEP.
Hi.
And Peter Heffele, Director of the Wilfred Martin Centre, a think tank affiliated with the European People's Party. You're all very welcome. But before we bring in your views, let's just hear how the situation is in Gaza, where 2.3 million people rely on aid to survive. They're governed, of course, by Hamas, the political and militant group that the EU recognises as a terrorist group, the group that attacked Israel back in October 2023, killing 1,200 people and taking 250 hostages.
The Gaza Strip lies in ruins. A deal to end the fighting remains elusive. Israel has issued an ultimatum to Hamas: release the remaining hostages or their territory will be flattened and residents relocated. US President Trump, who visited the Middle East this week, has given Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu practically the authorization to go ahead. Meanwhile, fears of famine in Gaza are growing. Food is running out. EU leaders say Israel is preventing aid from entering Gaza. And Israel accuses the UN of allowing aid to fall into the hands of Hamas. So what's next? As mediation efforts by the US, Qatar and Egypt have failed, can Europe step up to the plate? What leverage do Europeans have? The clock is ticking.
The clock is ticking and the death toll rising, with over 55,000 deaths there recorded in Gaza. Peter, let me start with you. What more should Europe be doing to stop this decade-long conflict?
Well, first of all, it's unfortunately not the conflict Israel-Gaza alone. It's embedded in a larger, very complex network of conflicts in the Middle East. And Europe has to engage on that level as well. We are not at the stage where we really partner acknowledged in the region. I do a lot on EU relations to the Middle East, for example, and there are groundbreaking developments there which we have to tackle as well. And this then, and only then, I would say, we can tackle to Gaza. One issue I'm very much concerned is the impact on the Israeli society and the Israeli politics, because that's the only democracy in the region and it is detrimental status.
But what about the plight of the people in Gaza? We've seen the pictures there. I mean, they speak for themselves, and we see EU leaders constantly sending letters of condemnation, Evan, and calling for a two-state solution. But really, when it comes to action, they've done very little.
That is very correct. And this will go to the history as total negligent of what's happening right now in Gaza. It's actually in practice it is a genocide that is taking place. When having a discussion with the High Representative, for example, and calling for the suspension of the EU-Israeli trade agreement, the answer of the High Representative is that suspension will not lead to any less people being killed in Gaza, and that is very, very ignorant response, I would say, because if we had that logic towards Russia, which nobody ever would have, that would mean that we would have given Russia the possibility to...
well, the High Representative, you're referring, of course, to Kaja Kallas.
Yes.
She can only really do what the EU member states let her do. Mark Botenga, what's your take on the situation?
Well, I think Kaja Kallas, as kind of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the European Union, has been horrible on this. She has, at a time when there's an arrest warrant against Prime Minister Netanyahu, when the International Court of Justice spoke about the risk of genocide, when international human rights organizations speak about, the ethnic cleansing, the apartheid regime in Israel, she goes to Israel and she says, the EU and Israel are very good partners. Now, that is an absolute shame. You would not see that anywhere else. And the European Union has not been inactive in regard to this. We have been actively supporting Israel because we indeed have a privileged partnership agreement with them, the association agreement. This gives Israel access to EU funds. There's still weapons going through Europe to Israel, meaning that in reality, if you look at international law, the European Union is complicit in what's ongoing right now.
But some member states actually do want to change that situation. I saw there was a paper going around this week from the Dutch government proposed by it. We also saw the French President Emmanuel Macron speaking on television this week saying the situation was a disgrace. But we'll come back to that in a minute because I really do want to hone in more on Gaza. Because we had arranged, in fact, an interview this week with the doctor who's in Gaza. But due to the large number of bunker buster bombs outside, in fact, the European Gaza hospital, that the Israeli military, of course, says is a command and control centre from Hamas, well, he couldn't speak to us. But we did manage to reach a UN envoy who told us that the majority of the population there are at risk of famine.
I was in Gaza until last Sunday, and I spent a week in Gaza with our team from the World Food Programme. And the situation is really, it's as if the road is coming to an end. You've got a population that is facing major challenges related to their daily food intake. They are eating 1.5 meal per day. A bag of wheat flour, which is really a key staple, is now at a price of around $560. If it's available, by the way, on the market, because there is less and less, given the fact that there's a full closure now for more than 70 days. And as well, you've got many of the different products that start also to be rotten.
That's Antoine Renard. They're describing the reality inside Gaza, saying the road is coming to an end. The UN, of course, have been calling for a long time to get international aid in, but it's not happening. And the EU does have leverage here.
Well, it has leverage on both sides versus Israel as well. You mentioned the agreement. I'm not quite convinced that suspending these agreements would give us a larger leverage. I think closing channels is often not an issue. I fully agree on your argument that the reputation of Europeans, not only in this conflict, but in the global south, for example, is at stake. And this has tremendous effects on other conflicts, which Europe should be involved as a partner.
Well, of course, Germany and Israel have a very special friendship.
That plays into this issue as well.
But what I find very interesting of late as well is that Israelis themselves are turning against their government. They have been out on the streets for the last weeks and months as well, calling on Benjamin Netanyahu to stop. One man, in fact, Shai Moses, whose parents were kidnapped by Hamas and then later released, told crowds last week that the real enemy is not Hamas. It's actually Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's destroying Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. Would you agree with that, Mark Botenga? Is he prolonging the war for his own personal and political gain?
Well, there was recently a list that was leaked of the priority of the Israeli army in Gaza, and releasing the hostages, saving the hostages was the last point on the list. So they invoke this, but in reality what it is what Israel's been doing for decades now. It's illegally occupying and seizing territory. Ethnic cleansing, has been ongoing in the West Bank, so another part of Palestine, for many years. This has been condemned by the United Nations numerous times, right? And we have not one time taken sanctions against Israel. And so we have leverage if we take sanctions. Because, imagine when Russia invaded Ukraine, they would have argued we need a special agreement with Russia to be able to speak with them. No one argued for that. So what we need today is put sanctions, and all the rest, we're going to let these people die. That's what's happening.
And you're from the left group, so we know what your views are, and you from the socialists as well. But Emmanuel Macron, that's the message he's been sending as well this week, Peter. He wants to suspend perhaps this cooperation with Israel. He also wants to see sanctions. That's the very word that he used in that interview this week in France.
And I'm glad that Macron is demanding sanction, but I would have wanted to see, first and foremost, more heads of states to demand it, and much, much earlier. The occupation has been going on for over 50 years, and impunity has been de facto what has been leading the whole situation right now. No actions have been taken, not even now, when so many people have been killed, over 50,000 people, 70% of them children and women. Innocent people have been killed. Not even now. A majority of the heads of states have said it's time to act. And not even now, a majority in the European Parliament says it's time to act. As my colleague said, I mean, we would not have this logic towards Russia. We would not let Russia commit the horrific crimes against international law without taking actions. But we let Israel just do what they want without any actions taken.
And as I said, you know, Germany and Israel have a special friendship. We saw the Israeli president, he was the first head of state, I think, to be formally invited to Friedrich Merz, to the Chancellery. We also saw President Steinmeier, the German president, this week in Israel. Was he using that moment he had with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to put leverage, to put pressure, to stop what they're doing in Gaza?
Not for the moment at all. It was not a major issue also in the coalition treaty, for example. We might see how it will evolve. Again, my point is we have to get into the society of Israel and change the forces there.
But what about Gaza? What about the populations there?
Well, we have to open channels. I fully buy into your arguments. There is a kind of genocide which is happening there. There's no debate. Yet I look from a political point of view, and we have to attack these forces who are behind these kind of policies, unless we continue these conflicts in different ways. And you mentioned West Bank. It's the other field which soon will blow up.
And that's the thing here, right? Because it's the Israelis themselves who do not support this, what's going on.
Yep.
And the Israelis themselves are suffering attacks all across the world, and there's anti-Semitism on the rise.
The Israeli society inside.
And he's not listening to them, to their concerns.
I met many families to hostages. Some of them even said, we want weapon embargo. We want you to take weapon embargo even towards our own government and suspend the EU trade agreement. You need to take actions. At the same time as families of hostages demand that from us, we have people, a majority, that's the fact, the majority today in the European Parliament containing of the right and the far right do not want to take any action. So words are very cheap, but actions is what makes difference.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I said there is action. So inaction is also action, because we are supporting Israel right now through arms, through money. So let's not pretend we are not doing anything. We're also giving credibility to Israel by meeting with their leaders. You know, I mean, we wouldn't do that. Like no European leader, I mean, aside from some exceptions, but no, like Kaja Kallas or Ursula von der Leyen, they would not go to Moscow right now. They're going to Israel, or they're inviting Israelis.
But Roberta Metsola, the European Parliament president, she did go to Palestine as well.
She did indeed, but
but she was there for like 5 minutes.
But the question's really here: do you put people on a par? You have one people being massacred in Gaza. You have children, you have journalists, you know, you have humanitarian workers being targeted. You have doctors coming back, you know, Western doctors that go there, that come back, they say children are being shot and targeted in the head. Okay, and then you say, oh yes, but we have two sides that look at. No. There's one side that's being massacred. These children, and we can help them. How come we can send weapons to Ukraine, but we can't send food aid into Gaza?
I mean, that is the point that civil society have been making for a long time, Mark Botenga. That's why we've seen as well thousands of people out on the streets of Europe calling for more action. We had a chat as well with Bushra Khalidi. She works for Oxfam over in Jerusalem, and she had a strong message for the EU capital, for Brussels.
I say it, and I'll say it again. Stop selling weapons to Israel. Stop trading with Israel. I mean, there was an announcement by the Israeli government yesterday to accelerate annexation plans in the West Bank. And Israel, the EU, remains the biggest trading partner of Israel, and it continues to trade with illegal settlements that have been deemed illegal by international courts. There's an ICJ advisory opinion that says that the occupation is illegal, yet the EU continues to trade with Israel. So, you know, there are things that we can do, but Western governments are choosing not to, and they're choosing to remain silent or condemn with words, but that has no meaning on the ground. It has no impact on the ground.
So Bushra Khalidi there, reiterating really a similar message to yourself, Mark Botenga. And the reality here, Peter, is that the EU, we are a payer, but not a diplomatic player at all.
That's why I referred to the whole situation. That is not only an issue for Gaza or Israel, it goes into the Middle East with other conflicts from Iran to Yemen. And we see that we are sidelined. And this is the larger strategic context we have to think as well.
I think we are sidelined, if I may. We are sidelined for a reason. It's true that the European Union has been completely sidelined diplomatically. You can see it throughout the world. If you look at Iran, 10, 15 years ago, European countries were very much involved in the negotiations around the Iranian nuclear program. Today, they're not present anymore. On Palestine, European countries played a big part historically for the last decades in the question. Today, on peace negotiations, European countries are nowhere. They're not present. They're not at the table. Even in Africa, Congo, Rwanda, historically, European countries were negotiating. Today, it's being done in Doha. At the behest of the Americans. So the question is here, the double standards of the European Union, the fact that we speak about international law, human rights when it's about Ukraine, our geopolitical interest, but not for the rest of the world, it is completely destroying European diplomatic credibility.
And despite the fact that since the Lisbon Treaty, we have more of a common security and foreign policy, we have also representations all across the globe. You think we'd be having more clout here?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a decision made by the heads of states. It's decision made by Commission and majorities of the European Parliament that leads to inactions of the European Union. So that we don't play a role, it's our own actions or inactions that have led to that. I just also want to highlight, you mentioned that the president of the parliament went both to Israel and Palestine, but she actually went to Palestine after many of us MEPs demanding, because we got to know that she will go to Israel. What we heard was that there was no Palestinian visit in the agenda. So after pressure, she decided to go to Palestine also. And this is a big shame, because that if she wouldn't have gone to Palestine, it would have sent really, really bad signal.
And she's, of course, a member of your party, of the European People's Party. How did that go down, her visit to Palestine in your group, which is obviously very pro-Israel?
Well, the basic line is that we want a two-state solution. That is a clear line. We have to put pressure on both sides. The role of Hamas is very critical. That's the biggest challenge, I think, for us, that who is speaking really for the Palestinian people.
And how concerned are you about Donald Trump's plans for the region?
That would be an absolute disaster, his fancy plans. And I just spoke to Turkish colleagues yesterday. Turkey might be even playing a role in this emptying the Gaza. So there are fatal plans out there we have not even thought about.
And of course, this week, Donald Trump was in the Middle East. He was in Saudi Arabia alongside Elon Musk. It's really concerning, isn't it, his plans to try and turn this region into the Riviera and move a lot of Gazans out of the region?
Well, yes, it's also criminal. It's not just concerning, it's absolutely criminal. It's basically you're normalizing the ethnic cleansing of, let's say, 2 million people. More probably, because it's not going to be limited to Gaza if it goes this way. So you've got an international rhetoric now coming from the West, which always presented itself as the guardian of human rights, international law, rightly or wrongly so, because it's not like Joe Biden had a wonderful policy on this, but which is now openly, brazenly saying, we don't care about international law, we don't care about human rights for some people, and we're going to turn this into a real estate project.
And that's a concern. We have so many viewers always writing to us about that issue, that the EU's image now on the world stage as a promoter of peace, of democracy and of human rights is really under the microscope here. And this is very damaging for the EU, Peter.
Yes, a long-term and long-known problem as well. But there are many other conflicts where our voice and our engagement has to be counted in. And you mentioned Africa, conflicts in South Asia, Central Asia. So where is our voice? And we have the resources and we have the strategies even for these kind of regions. But the missing piece is coherent, unified action.
Peter, I think we agree on, it seems like we agree on quite a lot on this topic. But I would also like I would have hoped that many more of the EPP-affiliated MEPs and also politicians were having your perspective. And it's a problem that they do not today. And that's why we are where we are, with an inaction of the European Parliament towards what's happening right now, but an actions in supporting Israel. So constantly there is people repeating that Israel has the right to defend itself against Hamas, and they do have that. But this war that is being committed is not against Hamas right now. It's against the people, Palestinian people in Gaza, but also in the rest of Palestine.
Yeah, valid point. And of course, this weekend, the much-loved Eurovision Song Contest is taking place. And obviously there's been a lot of protests as well about whether or not Israel should participate or not. And their artist, in fact, they've chosen this year is a 24-year-old, Yuval Raphael. She was actually at that Nova Music Festival on October 7th when Hamas gunmen attacked. So not an easy situation either for her.
Well, for her, that's another topic. The fact is Israel should not participate in Eurovision. Eurovision, for them, is a propaganda tool. There's a reason Russia was excluded. You know, because Eurovision is now trying to pretend, no, but we are apolitical, but then they ban Palestinian flags, but they let Israel participate. So already it's not apolitical. But the biggest argument against it is that you excluded Russia. Why do you exclude Russia and not Israel? What's your objective thing? So if you say we're apolitical, then Russia should participate, right? But which is clearly not the case. We all know why. Why can Israel participate and whitewash crimes?
And the Eurovision, of course, just to remind our viewers, was brought about a bit like the EU to bring about peace and harmony through song and through culture. It was in your country last year in Sweden. What are your views on this?
I think that what is important is that we cannot have double standards. How we treat one country, we need to treat the other. And a perpetrator doesn't become a perpetrator, less perpetrator because it has another name. A victim doesn't become less of a victim because it has another name. So it's important, as we have treated Russia, we also need to treat other perpetrators, as, for example, Israel in this case.
And very brief final comment with yourself.
Well, back to arts, I think excluding is not an option, neither in the case of Russia nor in the case of Israel. I think we should use these kind of channels. Art is connecting, inspiring, and that's why I'm against all these exclusion policies. That would be, I think, the detrimental effect to that.
And on that point, we can bring this conversation to a close. Do let us know what you think on the discussion we're having. BrusselsMyLove@euronews.com is our email address. But stay with us here, because we'll be back very shortly to talk about the European Union's hope to move from being a soft power to a hard military one. Stay with us here on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, My Love, our weekly chat show here on Euronews, where we just take a look back at the big stories of the week. And this week saw the second ever EU-Ukraine Defence Forum take place. It's part of the EU's plans to rearm, get ready for potential invasions, and also integrate the Ukrainian defence industry into Europe's. Get tips from a country that learned fast how to fight and defend themselves. So this is really trying to move from being this soft power peace project to a military power. What are your thoughts, Mark Bateng, on this? I know you've been around as an MEP for a long time.
Well, a long time, not that old. No, in a sense, I think it's a historic mistake. If we look at the program right now, first of all, it doesn't start off from an analysis of EU needs in matters of security and defense. We keep on basing ourselves partially on NATO assessments, which is a different kind of risk assessment, right? I mean, what NATO has or might have is different from what the European Union might. Secondly, we've got a program, a rearm program, that's going to be based very much on national debt creation. So this means that certain countries like the Germans might be able to, as the new chancellor said, become the strongest army in Europe, have the strongest industry, while other countries that have worse credit ratings will not be able to make up. And this is something that, for example, the Italians are very concerned about. And thirdly, it's not a European program because there's included weapons purchases from the United States.
Do you not get worried, though, Evan, when you see those images of the military parade that Vladimir Putin put on just last week?
I think that we shouldn't be naive. We need to see the world as it is right now. And the world also requires us to be able to stand on our own feet. How deep the cooperation should be, it's another thing. Because I think that we shouldn't run too fast, but we shouldn't also go too slow. A majority, I think it's 22, 23 of our member states are already a member of NATO. So we have a quite important cooperation within the NATO. At the same time, as we do not know what would happen if, for example, US in the near future might leave NATO. Hopefully they will not, but that could be the consequence. So we need to be prepared and be able as European Union to stand on our own feet. So the discussion on a stronger cooperation is actually very valid.
And the reality is now the majority of our weapons are American, and the majority of the contracts are with Americans who can, we don't want to be reliant on them. And this is something that France, for example, is trying to change. And actually there was a big report that came out, not from NATO, Mark Botenga, but actually from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute saying that we're highly dependent here in Europe on the United States. We had a chat with one of their authors. We can take a listen.
When we look at the weapons that European NATO states import, then a very significant part of that comes from the US, more than 50%. Of course, European states also make their own arms, but the figures which I just mentioned there indicate how important the US is and also will be for European armament dynamics. It is very hard to see how Europe's military capacity can be independent from the US. It is a way of cementing the ties with the US by buying US military equipment. It makes them also somewhat dependent on Europe itself.
Peter Vesman there. Your reaction to what you heard?
Well, we have a window of 10 to 15 years in which we have indeed to get our boots solidly on the ground. We know exactly the deficits, the capabilities. It's not about EU or NATO. NATO will remain the overarching security umbrella. It will be a European NATO. I'm quite convinced that the NATO structures will be Europeanized. We will see European command and control structures in 10 to 15 years. We have to identify exactly which are the missing points, and Europe has to invest much more. I hope that we finally make our promises become valid in terms of a European procurement, and then the issues you mentioned are less of concern, because then it's a common buying process.
Well, there's plans now to invest big bucks, like 650 billion in the next 4 years in the defence sector. Will we have any money left for social welfare, for housing, for education?
Well, that's of course what people are rightly angry about, because the European Union has been known throughout countries really to say to governments, and governments participated in this, there's no money. You need to cut back on social services, on public services, on housing, on and so on and so on. And now suddenly they find 800 billion, or 650 if you want, plus 150 for weapons. And then people are like, what? So there is money. If you want to tackle a crisis, apparently you can find the money. So why was there never money for the healthcare crisis? Why was there never money? And so people are very angry about this.
This is the conversation that governments will be having to have, fights that we'll see.
But that is the point. And in Germany, why we extended that kind of expenditure, including other kind of infrastructure. And these lines are anyway blurred. Investment we will see goes into logistics, for example. It's a double purpose.
And interesting, Peter said, we need to get ready to, quote, put our boots on the ground. As in, do we all need to militarise? Do we all need to be ready to know how to fight? We've seen countries like the Netherlands, they're sending out questionnaires to young people to find out if they're willing to go for service.
I mean, I think that's why we need the EU cooperation, to ensure that everybody contributes, and so that it's not 27 member states conducting their own wars, but rather that we do it jointly. And of course, it shouldn't come to a point where we need to go into war, but we need to be prepared if, God forbid, something happens and we will need to do it. But I also just wanted to say something about the issue of money to weapons or no money to other things, as, for example, welfare state. It depends fully on the economic policies that are being conducted. In Sweden, for example, my government, the far-right government, is deciding to lower the taxes for the richest, which means that there is less money to put on both the security and defense, but also on welfare state. So if you decide to cut the taxes for the rich, then you have made your choice.
And Europe's getting very old, and we have a very expensive welfare state, which is no guarantee that we still have.
This is what we want to keep. And, there's even an accountant that has no political understanding or interest whatsoever would ask the following question. Why, when we are spending vastly more than most countries in the world, including 3 times more than Russia, we've got more fighter jets than them, more tanks, artillery, whatever, why would we today be unable to defend ourselves? And that's a lack of cooperation. It's not a lack of spending.
It's a lack of cooperation and efficiency, and we waste simply a lot of money.
But therefore, we don't need to invest 800 billion. We need to cooperate better, which is a different story.
We agreed.
It's so frustrating. And I feel like if only we cooperated better in so many different areas, everything would be just fine. But unfortunately, we don't.
Well, we need to change policies a bit as well.
And we will keep having this conversation here. Thank you so much to our panellists for your insights and for being with us. And thank you so much for watching. See you very soon here on Euronews. Welcome to Brussels, my love, Euronews' talk show about the highs and lows of European politics. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with members of the European Parliament, Mark Botenga and Evan Inchier and Peter Heffele from the Martens Centre, we're just having a look back at the news of late. And this one was busy with the news on the Pfizergate case and the EU TikTok ruling. But what we want to focus on is this: the white smoke, the new 69-year-old Pope and his potential impact on the world. The image there of the first ever American Pope, Pope Leo XIV, was all over our TV screens and social media for a few days. He spoke to the press this week, outlining his views for the world. He even set up his own Instagram account that already has almost 13 million followers. So, Peter, what do you think of the new Pope? What does it mean for the world?
I think it's a lot of continuity. Don't expect a huge revolution happening in the Vatican. He has to deal with internal reforms, and I think he is very well prepared on that because he worked in the dicastery, that's the central organization in the Vatican, and he has the experience of the American Catholic Church, which for many years is in big troubles, and he sharpened his swords and diplomatic knowledge on that field.
And how should he deal with issues like LGBTQ plus inclusion, the role of women in the Catholic Church, clerical abuse accountability, these tricky issues?
They are very tricky issues, but I would first want to say that I think why it has become a big topic on the new Pope is that many people are longing for some kind of leadership for human dignity. And the last Pope, Pope Francis, showed that he can make a conservative Catholic Church to move towards more human dignity, stand up for the human values in context, in a world where wars are growing, where hatred is growing. But, of course, I don't expect a revolutionary change within the Catholic Church, but I hope that he will at least continue the legacy of the last Pope Francis.
Well, let's just take a message to him, or listen, to him and his message, which, of course, is one of spreading peace.
Mai più la guerra.
Never again war. I carry in my heart the sufferings of the beloved Ukrainian people. Let everything possible be done to achieve a genuine peace as soon as possible.
Giungere al più presto a una pace autentica. Mi addolora profondamente.
I am deeply saddened by what is happening in the Gaza Strip. May the fire cease immediately. Bring humanitarian aid to the exhausted civilian population and free all the hostages.
Popolazione civile e siano liberati tutti gli ostaggi.
So the new Pope Leo there speaking. Mark Botenga, do these statements, can they make a difference?
Well, I think they do. I mean, the previous Pope had a very active diplomatic activity, also on the war in Ukraine, for example. He had a special envoy that traveled throughout the world to try to get to peace talks in Ukraine. And he made a difference, I think, as well to people in Gaza. He was calling Christians in Gaza, I think, every night or every other night to support them, while they were under Israeli bombs. That makes a difference, I think, to people. Today, the new Pope, we will have to see where he will go internationally. I mean, his first speech was positive on this regard. And at the same time, they work within a very stringent institution where, yes, there is no equality for women, where the LGBTQI rights are obviously in our respect. And especially, you mentioned it, the sexual abuse. The previous Pope, when he came to Belgium, he had some words that were absolutely unacceptable in regard to sexual abuse.
And this is turning modern Catholics away from the church.
Europe in particular is the field where the disputes are. My own home church in Germany is highly divided. I hope that he can heal a bit of these debates. The interesting thing and the interesting message, in my point, is against this nationalism, these radical ideologies. I think there he has a voice to raise. In his own home country, by the way.
And what about the impact on the political impact it can have on the EU, the Vatican? I know the EU ambassador to the Vatican, to the Holy See, is Martin Selmayr. He's a former close aide of Jean-Claude Juncker, the previous Commission President.
I hope that we make difference between the 2025. We make difference between religion and politics, but nevertheless, I mean, we have seen, especially with the last Pope, how it has given people hope, but if colleagues of mine would have listened in the European Parliament, would have listened to the last Pope, the European Parliament would have acted towards Israel a long time ago. So on one hand, I hope that we still 2025 are towards more secular development and not mix religion and politics.
Well, I mean, it always gets mixed, doesn't it? I mean, but it is interesting that Pope Leo's stance on immigration is the polar opposite of Donald Trump's policy and also many European hardliners. This issue similar as well here.
Absolutely, as I mentioned, the fight will be in his own country. I think his strong stand on Latin America is a good continuation of the last Pope. This is a continent we in Europe neglect, unfortunately, but a lot of tensions happen there. So having a voice and a view on that region.
He spent many years in Peru, speaks perfect Spanish.
That is an advantage. Asia is another topic which is not represented very well in the global Catholic structures, I would say.
And just your take really there on the influence of the Vatican on the EU, on Brussels, with, as I mentioned, Martin Selmayr there as the ambassador.
Well, I mean, the influence of the Vatican in Italian politics is very important. There is no real separation of church and state. If you look at the agreements, they have historical agreements. The same thing at the EU. I don't think the Catholic Church should influence EU politics. That is not their role. We need to split that. Let's be very clear. At the same time, yes, there's the Catholic Church is an extremely powerful institution. Many people have their membership card. So it's an extremely powerful, money-wise, politically institution. So obviously it's going to have an influence. But our fight is to make sure that our countries are run by democracy, not by theocracy.
Well, the interesting part is the theological part. We had some contributions by the last Pope, even more by his predecessors. And this should not be underestimated, because you have to start with the basis and the reinterpretation of many things. Otherwise, this remains quite superficial. And this is not a contradiction between politics and the church. We know exactly the line, and Christian democracy went along that line. But don't forget, you have to reinterpret this message.
Okay.
The Bible.
And on that point, on the Bible, we can bring this conversation to a close. Thank you so much to our panel. And thank you so much for watching. If you want to continue the conversation or check in to say hello, do drop us a line on brusselsmylove@euronews.com. And if you'd like to watch this show, Brussels My Love, in any other language, you can visit euronews.com. German, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Greek and Hungarian versions are available for you to watch too. See you soon, though, here on Euronews.